If you wanted to destroy the greatest empire in the world, would you go around it? Or would you do the unthinkable and march a massive army, including dozens of war elephants, over frozen, death-filled mountains, just to catch them off guard? This is not a myth. It happened. And the man who dared it, Hannibal Barca, would become the single greatest fear of Rome for generations to come. This is the story of the march across the Alps and the war elephants that changed history. He was only 9 years old when his father brought him to the altar. There, before the Carthaginian gods, little Hannibal was made to swear never to be a friend of Rome. It wasn't just a symbolic oath, it was a curse that would shape his entire life, his every decision, and eventually, his march into legend. Hannibal Barca was born into a warrior family. His father, Hamilcar Barca, had fought against the Romans in the First Punic War, a war that ended with Carthage humiliated and forced to surrender its naval dominance. But in secret, the Barcas never accepted defeat. Hamilcar took his young son not to a classroom, but to the battlefield. As other children played with wooden toys, Hannibal learned to ride horses, to track terrain, and to read the enemy's mind. By the time he was in his teens, he had followed his father across North Africa and into Iberia, what we now know as Spain, expanding Carthage's influence and wealth. But behind every battle won and every city taken, there was a silent drumbeat that haunted Hannibal's thoughts. Rome, the enemy across the sea, the empire that had stolen Carthage's pride. He didn't just want to fight them, he wanted to break them. But oaths, like seeds, take time to grow. Years passed. The boy with burning eyes became a soldier, then a commander. Hannibal studied every war Rome had ever fought, every mistake they made, and every fear they tried to hide. He did not forget his promise. As Carthage expanded across Iberia, so did Hannibal's ambition. He knew that the road to Rome would not begin with a declaration, but with a march. And so, with 90,000 soldiers, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, he moved. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with precision. Because to defeat a giant, he would become the storm. Most generals would choose the sea. But Hannibal? He chose the snow. Why? Because Rome expected war to come from the south, from ships landing on the shores of Italy. They had fortified their coastline, stationed legions in key port cities, and waited. Hannibal knew that a direct invasion would be suicide. The Roman navy was still strong. If Carthaginian ships tried to land, they would be crushed before even reaching land. So, he thought of something no sane commander would dare: marching over the Alps. These mountains weren't just tall, they were death traps. Icy winds that could freeze men solid, narrow paths that crumbled beneath horses, avalanches, rock slides, and ambushes from mountain tribes who hated outsiders. But Hannibal believed the risk was worth it. If he could cross the Alps and descend into Italy from the north, he could catch the Romans completely off guard, strike deep into their homeland, and the shock alone could break their will to fight. But that wasn't enough. He wasn't just bringing soldiers. He brought something that no army had ever led through the Alps before: war elephants. Creatures that weighed several tons, armored and trained for battle, capable of crushing men underfoot or tossing them through the air like rag dolls. To the mountain tribes and Roman scouts, these beasts were monsters from another world. But to Hannibal, they were the soul of his strategy, a symbol of fear. The climb began in silence. There were no war cries, no trumpets, just the crunch of boots in snow and the howl of the mountain wind. The Alps didn't care about strategy, or courage, or elephants. They wanted blood. The first thing they lost was the light. The sun vanished behind jagged cliffs, and shadows consumed the narrow path. The army was climbing into a different world now, one ruled by ice and silence. Snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. The kind of snow that buries trails and swallows men whole. Hannibal's soldiers, wrapped in thin cloaks from Iberia, were no match for the bitter cold. Lips cracked, fingers turned blue. Every breath was a dagger. Mules carrying supplies stumbled on black ice and slipped into the abyss. Their screams echoed into nothingness. Then came the ambush. It began with a whistle, a single sharp tone from above. Then chaos. Rocks rained down from the cliffs. Screams filled the air. Arrows, flint-tipped and poisoned, whistled past the soldiers' heads. Mountain tribes, ghostly figures in the snow, emerged from behind rocks and ridgelines, hacking at the Carthaginians with cruel axes. Hannibal tried to rally his men, but the path was too narrow. The columns jammed. The elephants panicked. One massive bull elephant reared up, trumpeted in terror, and crashed backward into the men behind it, crushing 20 of them instantly. Blood spilled onto the snow, red on white. Hannibal was struck by a spear. Not deep, but enough to knock him down. He had to be carried on a shield for 2 days. Yet, he refused to stop. 2 full weeks. That's how long they bled. Climbed, starved. Some soldiers went mad. They talked to rocks. They marched in circles until they collapsed. At one point, a landslide buried 40 men alive. Their screams went on for hours beneath the snow, then fell silent. But they kept going, because Hannibal didn't stop. When they finally descended from the mountains, what was left of his army looked like ghosts, frostbitten, hollow-eyed, limbs wrapped in rags. But they had done it. They had crossed the Alps, and in the valleys below, Rome had no idea what was coming. They came down from the Alps like shadows slipping through smoke. Their cloaks were torn, their skin frost-bitten, their eyes hollow and sunken from starvation and grief. Some walked barefoot. Some leaned on broken spears, but they were alive. And behind them came the monsters. 37 elephants, covered in snow, rage in their blood. When they reached the plains of northern Italy, they didn't stop to celebrate. They built fires, boiled river water, buried their dead. Then Hannibal gathered his officers. His voice was hoarse, his face pale, but his eyes burned. "Rome," he said, "is not ready." And he was right. Roman scouts had never expected an army, let alone elephants, to come from the Alps. The towns in the Po Valley were defenseless. The legions were camped too far south. So Hannibal struck. The Battle of Trebia. The Roman general Sempronius was arrogant. He wanted a quick victory before winter. Hannibal baited him. One morning, he sent a small cavalry to attack the Roman camp and then retreat. Sempronius fell for it. Fueled by pride, he ordered his men to pursue across the icy river Trebia. It was December. The water was freezing. The soldiers shivered, soaked and stiff, as they reached the far bank. And then, it began. Hannibal's main force attacked from the front. Infantry, elephants, and cavalry. But the real trap came from the riverbanks. The night before, Hannibal had hidden a full unit of infantry in tall reeds and shallow marshes. Now, they rose, silent ghosts from the snow. They struck the Roman flanks. Arrows rained, spears pierced. The Romans were trapped in the middle, wet, cold, and exhausted. Panic spread like fire. Horses bolted, shields fell. Within hours, over 20,000 Roman soldiers were dead or captured. Hannibal's army had struck its first blow, and it shook the Roman world. But that was just the beginning. The Battle of Lake Trasimene, the fog trap. Months later, Rome tried again. They sent a new army under the consul Flaminius, an impulsive man who thought he could crush Hannibal in one quick strike. Hannibal watched him march. Then he chose the perfect spot, a narrow valley between the hills and the lake. At night, Hannibal moved his army into the hills, in silence. No campfires, no trumpets. Then, morning came. A thick fog blanketed the valley. Flaminius led his army right into it, never realizing what waited on both sides. The Roman columns snaked through the fog like blind cattle. And then, it happened. Horns blew from the hills. The fog exploded. Thousands of Carthaginian soldiers surged down the slopes, screaming, their blades flashing in the mist. From the front, elephants charged. From the back, cavalry closed the trap. The Romans had nowhere to run. The lake blocked their retreat. The hills were crawling with enemies. Some tried to swim. They drowned in armor. Others dropped weapons and begged. Flaminius himself was cut down on the spot, slain by a Gallic mercenary. In less than 3 hours, over 15,000 Roman soldiers were dead. It was one of the greatest ambushes in military history. And still, Hannibal didn't march on Rome. Not yet. Rome was humiliated. 2 entire legions had been destroyed, first at Trebia, then at Trasimene. Senators were panicking. Citizens fled the countryside, fearing Hannibal would appear at the city gates. But Hannibal never came. He camped nearby, rested his men, rebuilt his cavalry. Rome used the time to prepare, and they sent everything. In 216 BC, the Roman Republic raised its largest army in history, 80,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, commanded by 2 consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. Their goal, crush Hannibal, erase his name from history. They met on the plains of Cannae. The Roman army stretched wide across the flat land, 8 lines deep, a wall of red shields and steel helmets. Hannibal, outnumbered, stood calm. He had less than 50,000 men. His cavalry was weaker. But his mind was sharper than ever. He knew Roman pride. He knew they'd strike the center hard. So he built a trap. He placed his weakest infantry in the middle, forming a shallow crescent. On each wing, he positioned his strongest veterans and cavalry. When the Romans charged, they smashed into the center. Hannibal's middle line bent, but didn't break. Then, the trap closed. His veteran troops circled in from the sides. The Carthaginian cavalry, having routed Rome's horsemen, returned and struck from behind. The Romans were surrounded, squeezed from all directions. No escape, no air, no room to raise a shield. The killing became mechanical. Roman soldiers were cut down in piles. Others were trampled trying to flee. There was nowhere to go. For hours, the killing continued. By nightfall, over 50,000 Roman soldiers were dead. Bodies stacked like walls. Blood turned the dust red. It was the worst defeat in Roman history, and Hannibal had won it with fewer men. His generals begged him, "March on Rome, end it now." But Hannibal refused. "I can win battles," he said, "but I cannot win their hearts." He knew Rome would never surrender. Not yet. So instead, he waited, hoping allies would join him. hoping Rome would fracture. But Rome did not break. It adapted, it endured, it learned from its mistakes. And the war was far from over. After Cannae, Rome bled. Half its senate was dead. There were no more sons in noble houses, no more generals with unscarred arms. Yet still, Rome did not fall. While Hannibal waited for allies, Rome adapted. They changed tactics, avoided open battles. A young general named Scipio Africanus rose from the ashes. He learned from Hannibal, studied his traps, copied his strategies, and then he did the unthinkable. He invaded North Africa, forcing Hannibal to return home. The two giants met at Zama. The final clash, Scipio's army was disciplined. His cavalry was superior. Hannibal, older now, fought with fewer elephants. But the Roman had studied the master well. He broke the elephant charge, outmaneuvered the Carthaginian flanks, and finally defeated the man who had once crushed Rome's mightiest legions. Hannibal lost. Carthage surrendered. Rome spared the city, but demanded everything else. Hannibal became a hunted man. For years he moved through the east, Syria, Armenia, Bithynia. But Rome never forgot. They sent envoys, bribes, assassins, until one day, cornered and betrayed, Hannibal took poison. "Let us free Rome from her long terror," he said, "since she grows weary of the patience of an old man." He died, not on the battlefield, but in exile, alone. And yet, his shadow remained. Roman generals kept portraits of him. Children whispered his name at night. "Hannibal ad portas," they said. "Hannibal is at the gates." Even when he was long dead, he had crossed the Alps. He had killed 80,000 Romans in a single day, and he had brought the mighty republic to its knees. Hannibal Barca, the man Rome could defeat but never forget.